Today I'm going to talk about an organisation called Ayahuasca International, although sometimes they also call themselves Ayahuasca English, or sometimes they go by the name of Inner Mastery. Whichever name they use, know that this is all the same organisation. Now this video is going to be a little bit different from the ones I've done previously, in that I'm going to say straight off the bat that I do not recommend this organisation. I wanted to get that out there straight away at the beginning, just in case people didn't watch all the way to the end. But for those of you who want the full story as to why I do not like this retreat, let's take a detailed look at Ayahuasca International. So first, a little bit of background about the company. Ayahuasca International are based in Europe, and they put on retreats throughout the various EU countries. And this is what initially attracted me to them. I wanted to try ayahuasca, but I didn't want to commit to the time and expense of going to South America. I just wanted to test the water. And so a 2-day retreat somewhere close to home in Europe sounded absolutely ideal. Now this was the first retreat that I had ever been on, and so I went there with a lot of hope and expectation about the possibility of a life-changing experience. What I actually got was a fairly disappointing event which felt like a bit of a cash grab, and at around €450 for 2 nights, it certainly wasn't cheap. If that wasn't enough, then there were some very questionable things that happened, which I'll get into later on. Now what I usually like to do in these reviews is to show a lot of photos and videos to go along with my commentary of the experience. Unfortunately for this retreat, I just didn't take a lot of pictures. The reason being that the retreat was in a mountain location, which meant that it was absolutely freezing outside, and so we just stayed indoors for most of the time. And the actual inside of the lodge that we were staying at just wasn't worth taking photos of. I did get a few pictures of what it was like outdoors, and as you can see, the location was very nice. But because it was so cold, it just looks like we're on a skiing vacation. So apologies for the lack of any interesting images. I'll try and find some relevant stuff on Google to fill in the visuals, and I'll tag any images that weren't taken by me. So Ayahuasca International is different to most typical retreats in that they do not own any specialised facilities, but rather they tour around putting on retreats in suitable locations. And this has both positive and negative sides. On the positive side, it means that they are extremely mobile, so you can find them operating in most European countries. But the downside to this is that they will not have any specialised space for the ceremonies, but rather you find yourself in sort of large rented civic halls or lodgings. The place where I went to was a large ski lodge up in the mountains of Switzerland, which was a beautiful location, but it clearly wasn't made for this kind of activity. The accommodation was extremely basic, with dorm style rooms for up to 8 people. There wasn't a huge amount of space for hanging out. It was basically the hall where all the group activities like ceremonies, group share and eating took place. And then there was the dorm rooms, and that was it. Now at the retreat I was on, Ayahuasca International did not have any resident shamans. In fact, they do not take a traditional approach at all, and instead promote ayahuasca as a tool for psychotherapy. That in itself would be fine, but from what I saw, none of the people there were trained psychotherapists either. So who is facilitating these events? From what I saw, you had a group of fairly young, not particularly experienced, and in some cases slightly delusional people trying to manage this thing. Now that's not to say that any of these were bad people. All of them seemed to have their hearts in the right place, but I did not get the impression that these guys particularly knew what they were doing. One of the facilitators in particular I felt was completely full of shit. He repeatedly made some claims about the pharmacology which were blatantly untrue, but the main issue I had with him was how this guy was kind of slightly creepy and inappropriate he became during the group shows, and I'll cover that in the next section. From a quick look on their website, you can see that one of the products that Ayahuasca International sells is a facilitator training course, where you can pay them $800 for a 4-day course so that they can train you on how to administer ayahuasca and other plant medicines. So there you go. That's where they recruit their staff, from people who paid for a quick course, and honestly, I can't think of a more perfect example that highlights the kind of cash grab cowboy mentality of this organisation. Finally, it's worth noting that the founder of Ayahuasca International, Alberto Jose Varela, is notorious in the ayahuasca community and has been discredited and shunned by many traditional shamans and organisations. To quote one article by Al Jazeera, he is a charlatan who is making money unethically, and that his ayahuasca rituals are fraudulent, disrespectful and dangerous. Again, I'll put all links to all this in the description below. Now, as I've mentioned, the culture of Ayahuasca International is branded as psychotherapy rather than traditional healing. But what I experienced seemed very sketchy and inappropriate. Now, one of my female friends who I'd travelled with to this retreat had a history of sexual abuse, which came up in one of the group shares. And this one particular facilitator asked her to come forward, sit in front of the whole group in a vulnerable position with her legs open, spread across 2 different chairs so that everyone could see up her skirt. And then from this position of openness to begin talking about the sexual abuse within her past. She was clearly uncomfortable and kept saying she didn't want to do this, but the facilitators kept pressing her and pretty much bullied her into compliance. Afterwards, she told me that she felt pressured into it. Now, as I mentioned, Ayahuasca International will tell you that this is all part of the psychotherapy style of doing things. But I mentioned this to a relative of mine who is an actual qualified clinical psychologist, and she was horrified. She told me there is no way any professional psychiatrist would do something like this to somebody who was under their care. But it doesn't stop there. A quick look online shows that Ayahuasca International has a track record for these kind of weird practices. I'm going to put some links in the description below to a far worse case where a woman reported that the founder of Ayahuasca International gave her ayahuasca and then coerced her into removing her clothes and masturbating in front of him. The retreat I was on initially had around 40 people in the group, which was far too many for the space that we were in. There was very little space to move around, and there were only 4 facilitators for the entire group, which in my opinion is nowhere near enough. For purging, we were given little plastic freezer bags like this, and we're told that once we purged, we should tie a knot in it, pick it up, carry it across the room, and then put it in the bin. Now, this is pretty much the dumbest approach to purging I've ever seen. Firstly, when you're in the middle of an ayahuasca trip, then getting your head into a sturdy bucket is a challenge in itself. But messing around with a plastic bag which violently filling with the liquid contents of your stomach, and then having to get up, tie a knot in it, and then dispose of it yourself, all in the dark, trying to navigate other people on the floor, well, this is just absolutely crazy. So as a result, you'd have these floppy bags of vomit just lying around, just waiting for someone to step on them like some kind of puke landmine. It's a really dumb system, and it just seemed to me that the organisation was just too cheap to provide sturdy buckets, which just ties into the whole cheap cash grab feeling I got from this whole event. Now, throughout the ceremony, they play pre-recorded songs from a laptop. And again, the organisation here was absolutely terrible. I've got no problem at all with pre-recorded music if it's going to be, a curated playlist and each song fits into each other, but that just wasn't the case. They had a library of songs and they would just start and stop them abruptly, sometimes cutting out one mid-song when they decided that they wanted to listen to something else. It made for a really disjointed experience, and it came across as incredibly amateur. The medicine itself that they served was not particularly strong, at least not for my taste, but they did offer additional cups for those who wanted it. Now, one final thing to mention here about the ceremonies is that this organisation has a bad reputation with law enforcement, and so the ceremonies have been known to be raided by the police on multiple occasions. Now, this isn't hearsay, it's publicly acknowledged by the organisation themselves on their website. And I have a friend who was at one of their ceremonies in Switzerland where this actually occurred. So, if your idea of enlightenment is watching the police turn the place upside down, then this is the retreat for you. So, as you can no doubt tell, I was not impressed with this retreat at all. It's expensive for what they actually offer, its culture and practices are extremely questionable, and I do not recommend this organisation at all. I had a shitty time with them, and I think that these kind of retreats reflect badly on the global ayahuasca community. For anyone in Europe who's looking at this organisation as a cheap alternative to going to South America, then please look elsewhere. There are places that are with much better reputation in the Netherlands or in Spain. At the very least, if you do decide to go with this organisation, then do your homework first. Check some of these links I'm going to post in the description and know what you're getting yourself into. Okay, so that's it for this retreat review. As always, thanks for watching, and if you like the content here on Adeptus Psychonautica, then please like this video and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with new videos.